A British soldier was making his way from a train station in Woolwich to his barracks, which were about a mile away. And on the way, he was attacked. He was rammed and then beheaded by two kind of ISIS terrorists. And it caused it was a gigantic event in Britain. You know, the whole nation was in uproar. Everyone was disgusted. Everyone was angry that a British soldier could be butchered on the streets by these two Islamic terrorists. So, you know, that was a huge event in British political history. And like I said, I went up there the next day and they were still doing forensics. But I thought to myself then, something's got to be done about this, because at that point on the timeline, these Islamic extremists were running amok all over London, all over Birmingham, all over Luton. The whole country had a massive problem with Islamic extremists on the streets of this country, spewing hatred, spewing calls for violence. And the authorities were just allowing it to happen because they were terrified of being called racist. Just like the grooming gang scandal, the authorities were terrified of being called racist. So nothing was done about it. And then, of course, our patience kind of snapped when a British soldier was beheaded on the streets of London. And you know, no one else really did anything about it, but it was Britain first. It was myself and a few others said, that's it. The gloves are off. We're going to take the war to these people because this could happen again. And there was terror attack after terror attack. We've had so many terror attacks in this country. But in early 2014, I got together with about 20 activists in Kent, and we decided to launch something that we called Operation Fight Back. And what we thought we'd do was kind of copy some of what the Ulster Loyalists were doing, which was not becoming, I'm not saying we were like paramilitary, but we kind of copied their bravery, their approach to, you know, dealing with a problem head on. Because of what happened to Lee Rigby, we were determined to suffocate the activities and the activities and the demonstrations and the protests, everything that these Islamists were doing to recruit and to create an atmosphere of hatred against Western people. We were going to confront them head on. And we were going to, we basically, it was no holds barred. We didn't hold back. We just went straight in there, all guns blazing. So we found out where they lived. We found out where they worked. We stalked their social media profiles. We would basically, you know, harass them 24/7. We made their lives miserable. For example, it was shortly after we launched this that we found out where Anjem Choudhury lives. Now, everyone knows Anjem Choudhury. He's the chief spokesman of Islamic terrorists in Britain. He has been connected personally to, I think, about 90 terror plots in this country. He was the one who radicalized the killers of Lee Rigby. So we thought we'd go after him, you know, immediately, straight away. We found out where he lived. I put surveillance units on his house for 3 days, and it was finally confirmed that he lived at this address in East London. We turned up at his house with like 20 activists, all 20 of us, turned up at his front door. And just as luck would have it, he was just turning in to the road where he lived as we were there. And I lost control of all the activists, and they just chased his car up the road. They was hanging off his bonnet, and we gave him a real scare. The very next day, later that evening, I had credible death threats from a group called Islamic Emergency Defense, who said that if I go back to, if I harass Anjem Choudhury anymore, then I was going to suffer the consequences. So the very next day, I took the same team back to his front door and did a Facebook Live on his doorstep and said, okay, we're here. Where are you? They never turned up. So we went into the heart of Muslim East London, Brick Lane, just where East London Mosque is. And we've done another one. We said, where are you? We're here. All these threats, you know, let's see what you've got. And they didn't turn up. But then the Metropolitan Police intervened and arrested me, gave me bail conditions that I couldn't enter Greater London, the boundary of Greater London, even though that's where I was born and bred. I was banned from the whole of London just so I wouldn't be able to target these Islamists anymore. And it was just time after time after time. We were harassing terrorists, known hate preachers, all the people that were threatening the British people, the ones that were connected to Islamic terror plots. We were confronting them. We were harassing them. We made their lives a misery, because in the back of our minds, we had Lee Rigby. We had what happened to Lee Rigby was spurring us on. We've got to stop this happening again. So we have to keep up the pressure. And at the same time, every single activity we did, whether it was an ambush or a confrontation, we were uploading to Facebook, and the British people were lapping this up. In them, every video we put up was getting millions of views. It was going viral because the British people were fed up of watching these crowds of Islamists saying UK go to hell and all this kind of stuff, terror plots, terror attacks, and so on. And we were powerless. Everyone felt like we were powerless to deal with this. And there's this group of British men, you know, throwing caution to the wind and just harassing these people and chasing them off. So that's how we built initially a huge Facebook following. And it grew to the height of it. It was 2.2 million until it was closed. Yeah, 2.2 million. But it's not just that. It was the reach. The organic reach on a weekly basis was anywhere between 10 and 25 million UK individuals every week. So we at one point, we calculated we were reaching more people organically than the BBC by far. That's how much power that kind of reach, which also gives you influence and power. And that's how much we accumulated. But I'll give another example. We heard on social media, we came across some posts that said that Anjem Chowdhury and his gaggle were going to be outside the Indian embassy on the Strand in central London. They were protesting against the Hindus persecuting the Muslims in India. So, of course, we went there and one of Anjem Chowdhury's henchmen, we ambushed him and chased him across the road while the police were furiously holding us back. But also I walked down the road and found another one of them. It was only a young guy. He was about 18 years old, but he'd been radicalized by Anjem Chowdhury. And he was, you know, a complete ISIS fanatic at 18. But I was confronting him, trying to tell him the errors of his ways. A few weeks later, he was arrested by the police on his way to behead a British soldier. So these were the type of people that we were confronting, harassing and hunting down. And this is what really made Britain First a household name. This is what put us on the map. The fact that we were taking the fight to these Islamic extremists when the police just wouldn't touch them because they were terrified of being called racist.
And is it around this time that you outed the imam that was encouraging his congregation to abduct white girls and have them as sex slaves?
Yes. So what happened was I saw, I think it was Bedfordshire Police actually sued me in the High Court. And I was told that I would have to pay hundreds of thousands of pounds to fight in the High Court, to fight this High Court injunction, where we said, okay, look, we'll accept the High Court injunction as long as you don't ask for costs, because they were doing this deliberately. They're trying to bankrupt us. They were trying to, you know, cause us huge financial headaches. So Bedfordshire Police, in their words, took the unprecedented step of applying to get a High Court injunction to try and curb our activities, because they were worried, because Luton, which is the Luton police, were our kind of nemesis. We were in and out of Luton. You know, we were dealing with people like Savile Islam, the one who punched Tommy in the face through the car. I don't know if you've seen that video from the old days. But Luton's one of the hotbeds of Islamic extremists. Now, Bedford Police didn't want us going in there and knocking on people's doors and confronting these terrorists and so on. So they applied to the High Court and said, we want to ban them from the entire town of luton, and we want to ban them from every mosque in England and Wales for a period of 5 years. Now, to fight this, we would have had to pay something like £250,000 overall. And if we lost, we'd have to pay that plus their costs as well. So we just thought, you know what, Luton, okay, you know, it's makes us a bit sore on a matter of principle that we can't go, we're banned from an entire British town when we've done nothing wrong. But for the sake of paying £250,000, we will ignore Luton. So we agreed to the High Court injunction. I had a High Court injunction that said I couldn't go into any mosque in England and Wales. We agreed to that. So then shortly after that, I think it was like 5-6 months after that, I saw on the news, and I'm always looking at the news for these things to happen, that an imam at a mosque in Cardiff that was notorious for pumping out ISIS recruits. The imam had actually been caught on an audio recording saying that it's okay for Muslims to keep sex slaves, because that's what the Prophet Muhammad did. And this blew up all across the media. So I thought, you know what? We need to go down there. We need to go down there and confront this guy. So we turned up at this mosque in Cardiff. My team went into the mosque to confront this guy. I didn't go in. I stayed outside because I had the injunction. So he wasn't there. He'd fled and he was in hiding. So that was the end of that. And then shortly after that, I was being prosecuted for something else. I think it was walking through Luton with a Christian cross. I was being prosecuted for it. And it's ridiculous. I mean, if you read my book, The Battle of Britain, you will be shocked. I can guarantee it, because I've catalogued forensically all the things they've done to us. But we were walking through Luton with Christian crosses, and the police jumped on us. We were prosecuted. They arrested me. They arrested others. And when I was on trial at Luton Magistrates, the police actually came up to me and said, "Here you go, Mr. Golding, you've been served." And it was a folder this big with paper in it. So I'm looking through it thinking, what's all this about? And then it came to my attention that basically I was being prosecuted for contempt of court, for breaching the injunction that I just explained. And there was a folder that thick full of statements, CCTV pictures, God knows, everything. So shortly after that, I went to court, the High Court on the Strand in London. And the judge, it's funny actually, I was completely stitched up because I didn't actually face a High Court judge in the High Court, because the High Court is a civil arena. What they did was they actually brought in a criminal judge that deals with, criminal cases in the Old Bailey. So he's in the Crown Court, and they brought him across into the civil court exclusively for me, because civil judges are not really experienced in banging people up. It's mainly awarding damages and stuff like that. So they brought in a Crown Court judge specifically for my case, even though it was civil. So of course he was a lefty. He's one of these woke judges. And he just said, "Look, Mr. Golding, you flagrantly breached the injunction. I'm sentencing you to 4 weeks in prison." And immediately after that, this was the first time I've been to prison. They told me I was going to Pentonville prison round the corner. Now, I know Pentonville prison. It's nearly 200 years old. It's full of rats and what they called cockroaches, and it's disgusting. I don't think they've done any improvements in 200 years since the Victorian era. And I went there for 4 weeks, but thankfully I was put into complete solitary confinement. I was in my cell 24 hours a day. The only time I left my cell was to grab dinner, straight back to the cell. I was in solitary confinement for 4 weeks over Christmas, and that was my first stint in prison. But yeah, that's basically what I did. When I found out this imam had said what he said, I had to go down. I felt I had to go down there to confront him, because this is Britain. That was Wales. We can't have these Islamists saying that it's okay to the people worshipping their flock in front of them, that it's okay to keep sex slaves because the Prophet Muhammad did it. This is not 7th century Arabia. This was Wales in the 21st century. So we went down there to remind him of that, and they banged me up for 4 weeks.
So during that 4 weeks, then, how does it affect you psychologically? Because, we're all thinking what we're going to have for dinner, what we're going to watch on Netflix, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, your life is upside down. You're in a cell, all this time on your hands. How did you process that?
It was very difficult. The first time I went to prison was a lot more difficult than the second time I went to prison. But because I've never been to prison before. And I knew that Pentonville was it's perhaps the worst gang, petty gang prison in the country. There's some that are places like Belmarsh that got terrorists and murderers and so on. But if you're talking about violent gangs, Pentonville's the worst in the country, I think. So I was dreading it. When I was being taken by the prison van from the High Court to Pentonville, that was I was very anxious, very nervous, very anxious. But I had to grit my teeth and compose myself. And when I first arrived there, I went up to the processing. It was a woman that was processing me, and she went, don't worry, you're being put in solitary confinement. And that kind of took the weight off my shoulders a bit, because I knew if I get thrown out into general population, I'd be ripped to pieces within 5 minutes. Because they actually took me into the cafeteria straight away to get some food to take back to my new cell. That was the first thing that happened. And it was just, I was surrounded by Muslims and black gangs from London. That was it. That's it. That's all there was around me. So I was thinking, if I was in general population, I wouldn't last a day. I just simply wouldn't last. I'd be torn to shreds. I'd be stabbed. I'd be shanked. It wouldn't last.
Even though you're in solitary, they still sometimes have ways of getting you, like through the food, putting crushed glass and things in food. Were you apprehensive about eating the food?
No, well, actually, I was talking to Tommy Robinson about this before he got banged up. When he was in HMP only in 2018, you see, he got his food brought to him, so he couldn't trust that it hadn't been interfered with. But thankfully, twice a day I was taken out of my cell and I was taken by the prison officers to the canteen, so I could choose from like a buffet of food. I could see them getting scoops of it and putting it on the plate, then I'd take the plate away. So I was very thankful for that. But Tommy wasn't so fortunate. He had his food brought to him by Muslims, so there's no way I would have touched that, and there's no way he touched it. That's why he got so skinny when he came out of prison, because he'd literally been starved. So yeah, I was quite fortunate. But the thing about solitary confinement, it does mess with your head, because we're out here now, we've got our laptops, we've got our phones, we've got social media, we've got phone calls, we've got text messages, we've got WhatsApp coming through, we've got family and friends ringing us 24/7. We are quite consumed with technological stimuli all day long. When you're in solitary confinement, all that is gone, and all you've got is four walls and a small TV that's no bigger than a laptop screen, and it's about 10 foot away from you. And you have to, I was actually unfortunate because I had to get up to change the channel, and you only had the Freeview channels.
Wasn't that, Paul, wasn't that a relief? Wasn't that a relief to decompress from all of the insanity of modern life?
It was, but not for the first week. I would say once I got a week and a half into it, you can imagine your brain's going 1,000 miles an hour, and then after a week of solitary confinement, it's just slowly moving, slowly turning. So yeah, it does. It takes a long while to jump from hectic to completely, your mind being completely still, and it is quite a culture shock. But after 4 weeks, you're climbing the walls with boredom.
What did you do to pass? What did you do to pass the time?
Anything. Crosswords, watching TV, exercising, doing press ups, reading. I read about when I was in Pentonville, I read about 10 books. And when I was in prison the second time, I was in 2 different prisons, and I must have read about 15 books. So it's just reading. You have to keep yourself busy, but it is so boring, and it's really difficult to explain just how boring it is. It's like soul destroyingly boring. The most I've ever done is 9 weeks in prison, in solitary confinement. Done 9 weeks straight. Tommy's doing 9 months now. I don't think I could do 9 months. That will have a massive effect on your mental health. But thankfully, I've done, the first time I was in prison, I did 4 weeks in solitary. The second time was 9 weeks in solitary confinement. But it's still rough. It's still hard.
And what books were you reading? Was it like history, politics?
Yes, history. I can't really remember the books. I remember the second time I was in prison, I remember I read a book that thick on Joseph Stalin. Pretty much whatever I could get my hands on.
And what was your exercise routine? Were you doing the burpees?
I was doing press ups, shadow boxing. I've been doing boxing since I was little, so I was doing a lot of shadow boxing. But even that gets boring, because the boredom and the lack of technological stimuli, it just slows your brain right down to a crawl. So you just don't want to do anything. You don't want to exercise. I could understand if I was allowed to go to a gym and I was associating with other prisoners, and that would keep you kind of ticking over. But when you're in solitary, you lose the will to live. You literally just want to lay down all day. It becomes a kind of loop. where boredom creates the urge to be lazy, which creates more boredom. It's very difficult to break out of.
Was there any way to communicate with your neighbours?
No. I don't think I think that what they did was there was one particular landing in Pentonville, which was for detox prisoners, alcoholics and drug addicts, where they put them there to kind of dry out, like a bit of rehab. So I was put into the corner of the detox landing. So I think the cell next to me on both sides was empty. So I was in a very quiet part of the prison. But even in this quiet part of the prison, I could still hear mayhem on a daily basis. I could still hear massive fights taking place. And of course you think, oh, if this is a prison riot and they get the keys and they realise who I am, it is quite nerve-wracking. I hope and pray that anyone watching this doesn't have to go to a multicultural Islamist prison in London, God forbid.
Were you able to get any visits?
Yeah, I had some visits. Yeah, had I think 2 a week, but yeah, 1 or 2 a week, I think it was. But again, the main routine for me was just getting up, having breakfast, reading, watching TV, reading, watching TV, reading, watching TV, going to bed. Well, it was just the same day after day after day after day, grinding boredom. There's only so many books you can read before it starts to become really a real irritation. You read a book now and then, don't you? You don't want to shotgun read books one after the other, after the other, after the other. It really does become annoying after a while.
So in the visits then, when they brought you out, when they brought you out for a visit, were you in a visitation hall with other prisoners, or did they keep you separate somehow?
No, I was with other prisoners, but if I remember rightly, there was quite a bit of space between us and other tables, and everyone kept to themselves. The second time I went to prison in 2018, they put me into general population because it was a prison in Kent. Within 3 days, I was attacked in my cell by a bearded Islamist gang, and I sustained quite bad injuries.
Paul, you've jumped ahead. Let's go back to you getting released from this 4 weeks. We'll get to that one. You get released from this 4 weeks. You must be thinking about what you're going to do when you get out. What did you do?
I got well, actually, quite funny, actually. So I had people, I asked, obviously, I knew I was being released on a certain date, and I asked them what time. I said, look, what time am I going to be released? They said, well, probably about 9 a.m. So I had a big team of Britain First people outside waiting for me. So my door comes flying open at 6 in the morning. And they say, right, you've got to go, Mr. Golding. I was like, oh, I've got 3 hours until my friends come to pick me up, my colleagues. So they said, no, you've got to go now. And they literally just kicked me out on the street outside in North London. So you imagine there's me, the leader of Britain First, walking around North London without a phone, without a wallet, no money, nothing. I'm just walking around with a bag of clothes. Thankfully, I managed to go into a local cafe, which was owned by Greek Cypriots. And I said to them, look, I've been kicked out of prison. I've got nothing. I've got people arriving. I know a phone number off by heart. So I got on the phone and I rang someone and I said, look, you're going to have to come as quickly as possible. They've stitched me up. They've kicked me out early. And I said, look, they're coming to get me. I've got nothing. Can I have some breakfast? They allowed me to have some breakfast on tick, make a phone call. I had some nice breakfast. I was quite enjoying myself, actually, at that point. I was enjoying that first taste of freedom. So I had a big English fry up. And I think it's about half an hour later, maybe 45 minutes later, I got picked up. And it's quite a strange thing. When you're in solitary confinement and you've not been looking at your phone for over a month, first thing I did was obviously get my phone. And as soon as I got my phone and looked at it, I was almost sick. The fact I was looking at a screen, pressing buttons and so on, it almost made me feel sick. It was an overwhelming of stimulus from the phone. And I was almost